Part 1: The Wise, the Bastard, and the Cruel. In 1337, King Edward III of England claimed the French throne from King Philip VI of France, beginning the Hundred Years' War. At first, the English won great victories like at Crecy in 1346 and Poitiers in 1356, where they even captured Philip's successor, King John II. The war paused in 1360 with the Treaty of Brittany. Edward III gave up his claim to the French crown, but gained a larger aquitaine. John II's ransom was set at 3 million gold crowns. After paying a part of it, he returned home, but left over a dozen hostages back in England, including his brother and 2 sons. The Treaty of Brittany was not perfect, however. Many ex-soldiers now had no work after 2 decades of war, and became routiers, wandering bands of mercenaries and criminals who terrorized towns across France. In 1360, many of them formed the Great Company. They raided southeast France, captured Pont-Saint-Esprit, and threatened the Pope's lands in Avignon. By 1361, the Great Company broke apart, and many went to fight in Italy and Spain. Italy was full of small principalities and republics vying for power, and their wars attracted mercenaries looking for work. In 1361, the Pope hired some routiers to fight Milan, creating the White Company, led by Englishman John Hawkwood. They became famous for their speed, longbows, and violence. Meanwhile, John II struggled to pay his ransom. Hefty taxes angered the French, while hostages died waiting. After failing to negotiate easier terms with King Edward III, John's son Louis escaped captivity. In 1363, John himself traveled to England, hoping to speak with Edward directly to reduce the ransom and free his sons. But after an illness, John died in London on April 8, 1364. With the King of France dead and far from home, rivals rushed to take power. King Charles II of Navarre, already a troublemaker for King John, once wanted the French crown with English help. He now aimed to control the rich Duchy of Burgundy, though King John had already given it to his son, Philip. Charles II grew angry and, with his ally Jean de Grely, the Captal de Buch, planned to take it for himself. But in 1364, the French general Bertrand du Guesclin struck first. He captured towns along the Seine River and cut off Charles II's lands in Normandy. At Coquerel in May, Duke Guesclin defeated the Captal, captured him, and destroyed his army. Soon after, Charles V became King of France. Though often sick, he was clever and determined. He confirmed his brother Philip as Duke of Burgundy, crushing Charles's hopes. Afterwards, French armies took Navarrese castles, and the new tax gave Charles V a steady income to mold a strong, permanent, professional army out of the troublesome routier. Meanwhile, war raged in Brittany. After Duke John III died in 1341 without children, John of Montfort and Charles of Blois fought over the duchy. England backed Montfort, France blocked Blois. On September 29, 1364, the army of Montfort's son, John IV, killed Charles of Blois and captured Duke Guesclin at Array. John IV became Duke of Brittany. but because Brittany was now French land according to the Treaty of Brittany, the pro-English Duke had to swear loyalty to Charles V. As mentioned before, many ex-soldiers were looking for new work after the war. Some joined Peter IV, the King of Aragon, in modern-day Spain. Peter IV and French nobles supported Henry of Trastamara, the illegitimate son of the late King Alfonso XI of Castile. Because he was a bastard, Henry could not inherit the throne, so his half-brother Peter became king in 1350. King Peter of Castile ruled harshly, even killing Henry's mother to secure power. Henry swore revenge. Peter tried to win French support by marrying Blanche of Bourbon, but he abandoned her for his mistress. Blanche died in 1361, likely murdered, and France turned against him. Peter then allied with England and Navarre, giving Henry a chance to strike. In 1365, France, Aragon, and the Pope came together to fund a fake crusade against the Emirate of Granada, a small Muslim state in modern-day southern Spain. The true aim of this crusade was to place Henry on the Castilian throne. Bertrand du Guesclin, freed on ransom, led the force, gathering French, English, and Breton soldiers. On New Year's Day, 1366, the army marched west from Aragon, burning villages and killing hundreds. Iberian knights could not match their modern tactics. By February, towns in northern Castile opened their gates to Henry. Burgos and Toledo fell, and Henry crowned himself King of Castile. Peter fled to Seville, then into exile in Portugal and Galicia. From La Coruña, he sailed to Gascony to beg King Edward's son and heir, Edward, the Black Prince of Wales, for help. Peter met the Black Prince at his luxurious court at Bordeaux. The Black Prince agreed to help him, hoping to block France from getting Castile's powerful fleet, and to keep restless Routier busy. In return, Peter promised money, land, and trade. The deal led to a costly campaign. In early 1337, about 10,000 men from England, Gascony, and Routier companies crossed the snowy Pyrenees into Spain. Their first clash at Arniez ended badly, with 400 English killed. Still, they pressed on. On April 3rd, the armies met near the town of Nájera, nestled in the valley of the Ebro River. Henry ignored Bertrand du Guesclin's advice to avoid a direct charge, which was cut down by overwhelming volleys of English longbows. The retreat became a slaughter along the river and Nájera's streets. Henry escaped, but many nobles were taken, including du Guesclin once again. Soon, money disputes between Peter and the Black Prince broke out. The English wanted 2.7 million florins, but Peter refused to pay and left secretly. The Black Prince's men starved and fell sick, and the broken army returned to Bordeaux. There, the Black Prince demanded a new tax similar to that of King Charles V's to cover his debts, but La Coruña's nobles resisted. Meanwhile, Charles V gave Henry money and safe places, bought arms, and helped recruit soldiers. With this aid, Henry crossed into Castile in September 1367. By October, he entered Burgos a second time. Over the next months, Henry took much of Lyon at Old Castile and besieged Toledo in April 1368. Charles V's aide to Henry began to raise tensions between England and France. Relations with England looked calm on the surface, but Charles was bitter over the Treaty of Brittany. Arguments over land dragged on, and English routiers in France acted like unruly armies. Luckily, Charles had money saved up, as well as the people's support. When Gascon nobles complained about the Black Prince's new tax, Charles used it as a legal reason to retake Aquitaine. He met secretly with the Gascon nobles, promised to protect them, and gave the powerful Count of Armagnac land and money. In return, they agreed to side with France. Charles also continued to back Henry with soldiers and ships. In 1369, Henry won at the Battle of Montiel, killing Peter and ending Castile's civil war. France now had a strong ally with a large navy. At the same time, Edward failed to secure Flanders when the Pope blocked a planned marriage between his son Edmund and Margaret of Flanders, and Margaret was instead married to Charles's brother, Philip of Burgundy. The Black Prince tried to recruit soldiers, but was too sick to lead. French troops advanced in Rouergue and Crécy, where many local nobles and towns switched sides. The English court reacted slowly, and Charles declared that England had no right to resist. In May, the Gascon appeals were officially heard in Paris, while the English Parliament revived Edward's claim to the French throne. Part 2. A Return to Arms. By the time war started again between England and France, Edward was 60 and too old to fight. Parliament took charge of the war. His son, the Black Prince, was also sick and weak. Taxes in Aquitaine fell apart, so the Black Prince had to bring soldiers and supplies from England. French armies soon overran southern Aquitaine. All raids spread into Anjou, Maine, Berry, and Bourbonnais. Funding the war was incredibly expensive, so to keep fighting, English forces used the chevauchée, devastating raids that burned fields, robbed villages, and stole food to hurt France's economy and weaken Charles's authority as king. In 1370, Sir Robert Knowles landed with 4,000 men near Calais. His army marched through northern France, burning crops, demanding money, and attacking defenseless towns in Champagne. But Charles avoided battle, advised to let them go. They could not take the land away with them. At the start of October, Charles made Bertrand de Guesclin Constable of France, giving him command of the war effort. De Guesclin marched day and night to surprise the English near Pont-Valin, in northwest France. On December 4th, Knowles's army was overwhelmed and slaughtered. Out of an army of 4,000, only a few hundred reached safety across the Loire River. Meanwhile, Charles's brother John, the Duke of Berry, attacked Aquitaine. The local bishop of the city of Limoges allowed Berry to take the local castle, but leave the rest in English hands. In September, the Black Prince and his brother, John of Gaunt, retook Limoges. After breaching the walls, they stormed the city and killed hundreds of people as punishment for Limoges' defection. By 1370, John of Gaunt took over much of his sickly brother's duties in Aquitaine. In 1371, he married Constanza, daughter of the late King Peter of Castile. After the marriage, Constanza, her sister Isabel, and other Castilian exiles came with him to live under English protection. In 1372, Edward named Constanza Queen of Castile in London, allowing Gaunt to claim the Castilian throne. But their marriage backfired. King Henry sided with France, bringing along Castile's population, wealth, taxes, and navy. Together, France and Castile menaced the English coast and shipping, forcing more spending on defense. That June, a small English fleet carrying treasure to the port of La Rochelle was intercepted by a larger and stronger Castilian fleet. After 2 days of fighting, many English sailors were butchered, while their ships were sunk or burned. This left Aquitaine vulnerable, and more towns began defecting to France. French commanders, including Du Guesclin, seized castles and towns in Aquitaine with rapid speed. By September, French troops reached La Rochelle, while English defenses broke across Poitou, Saint-Thionne, and nearby lands. Edward could not organize his armies or fleets in time. By December 1372, France held nearly all of Poitou, one of England's richest provinces. England had lost its richest lands in Aquitaine. The small areas still under English rule made little money, while the cost to defend them was very high. England's navy was weak after defeat at La Rochelle, with too few ships to face France and Castile. Trade also suffered, since merchants now had to hire armed escorts, which raised the prices of the goods they shipped. Even so, England planned new land campaigns. Gaunt aimed to take 4,000 men through Brittany into Aquitaine, with dreams of reaching Castile. In Brittany, Gaunt's army tried to help Duke John IV, who, despite paying homage to Charles, was still adversarial to the French. The French marched quickly to straighten John IV out. Brest was put under siege, and Gaunt's men could not land safely. Now short of ships, Gaunt's army moved closer home to Calais. Landing there in mid-July with 6,000 soldiers, the English army began a new chevauchée, burning villages and farms in their path. The French were caught off guard and slowly assembled an army under Duke Philip of Burgundy. Philip ambushed and raided the English as they marched, causing them to lose many men and horses. By December 1373, they reached Bordeaux in ruin, half their horses dead, soldiers without armor and supplies, and desperately hungry. Despite praise at home, the army soon fell apart as soldiers deserted, while others refused to fight. By spring 1374, Gaunt abandoned his plans to invade Castile once again. By 1374, both France and England wanted a break from the fighting. French forces had shrunk Aquitaine to a size smaller than what it was when the war began in 1337, and had also pushed John out of Brittany. But France also faced problems. Heavy taxes burdened the people, the Black Death had returned, and Charles was often sick. He wanted peace talks in Bruges to secure a strong, stable future for his heir. Charles targeted the last English strongholds, especially Saint-Sever in Normandy, to strengthen France's position. In 1375, French forces used huge cannons that fired large stone balls, which demolished large sections of the wall and forced its defenders to abandon parts of the fortress. Although gunpowder weapons had been used in small quantities since the beginning of the war, onlookers across Europe knew that something had changed. On June 27, 1375, John of Gaunt and Duke Philip signed a truce. It favored France. English troops left Brittany, and Saint-Sever was given to France for 40,000 francs. Fighting stopped for a year, but problems remained. Castile could still raid English ships, while some Gascon garrisons refused to stand down. Meanwhile, the truce made many mercenaries once again jobless. Pope Gregory XI, desperate in his war against Florence, hired them. In 1377, Breton troops in his service looted the town of Chasséna and killed 4,000 people in a brutal massacre. In April 1375, the English Parliament was convened. Known later as the Good Parliament, Edward's ministers were accused of waste, corruption, and betrayal. Parliament said the English people were too poor to pay more in taxes, while royal officials grew rich. Gaunt tried to resist the efforts of the Good Parliament, but failed. By summer, several of Edward's ministers were impeached, and a council was set up to govern with the aging king. For a short time, it seemed like a great reform had happened. But then, the Black Prince died in June 1376. Edward's health soon collapsed after the death of his heir, and Gaunt took control of the government. In October, he overturned reforms and restored the corrupt officials to power in the Bad Parliament. London rioted, and Gaunt fled. Edward died of a stroke on June 21, 1377, leaving his 10-year-old grandson, Richard II, as King of England. Richard II came to power while England was busy fighting France and facing rising anger at the enormous wealth of the Roman Catholic Church. Oxford professor John Wycliffe was quick to attack the church by spreading his dangerous ideas, like the idea that God in the Bible had more authority than the Pope. He said kings should take back church land to force the clergy to lead simple, poor lives, and that Bibles, which were written exclusively in Latin, should also be written in local languages like English, so that every Christian could read and understand it. Wycliffe even said that the bread and wine given at communion did not really become the body and blood of Jesus Christ as widely believed at the time. While many scholars rejected his ideas about the Eucharist, others supported his attacks on church wealth and papal power. His followers became known as Lollards, as it seemed to other Catholics that Wycliffe was speaking nonsense. Part 3. Thus died the hope of the English. For while he lived, they feared no invasion, no onslaught of the enemy. Never did his people do badly or desert his banner in the field. Like Alexander, he never attacked a people that he did not conquer. He never besieged a city which he did not take. The deaths of Edward III and the Black Prince weakened England's position in the war. France had humiliated the English, but they too also lost key leaders. Bertrand du Guesclin died in July 1380, and King Charles V died in September, leaving his 12-year-old son, Charles VI as king. In Castile, King Henry died in 1379, and his son John became king. Peace might have come, but religion now divided both sides. In 1309, the Pope had moved from Rome to Avignon in southeastern France. In 1376, Pope Gregory XI returned to Rome, but after he died 2 years later, Italians chose Urban VI as Pope. He tried to reduce French influence, and so French cardinals rejected him and elected Clement VII in Avignon. The Catholic Church now had 2 popes claiming to be the one true pope, beginning the Western Schism. France, Scotland, Castile, and their allies supported Clement, while England, the Holy Roman Empire, and most of Italy backed Urban. Both popes pushed their supporters to fight the other. Meanwhile, towns in Flanders rebelled against their count, Louis II. The cities of Ghent, Bruges, and Ypres had grown rich from clothing they manufactured with English wool. But the industry slowed in the 1370s, causing job losses and heavy taxes. In 1379, Bruges built a canal that threatened Ghent's grain trade, which caused Ghent to erupt in anger. Count Louis was unable to pacify the city and had to agree to a truce. Much like Flanders, the peasantry of England had had enough. After the Black Death, fewer people meant higher wages and lower rents. Landowners fought back by forcing old rules and cutting wages. The unfair poll tax of 1381, collected by British outside officials, lit the final spark. Many refused to pay the poll tax. On May 30th, in Brentwood, Essex, villagers beat and killed some tax collectors, sparking a wider rebellion. Wat Tyler, a strong and persuasive leader, called for an end to serfdom and the removal of corrupt officials. Rebels from Essex and Kent marched on London. They burned records, attacked ministers, and destroyed palaces, but avoided random looting. In June, King Richard II met them at Mile End. Tyler pushed for land redistribution and abolishing church power. A scuffle then broke out, and Tyler was killed. Richard promised reforms if the rebels dispersed, but their leaders were soon executed, and the revolt collapsed. John Wycliffe and the Lollards were also persecuted after the rebellion and driven underground, though his ideas later spread to the Kingdom of Bohemia when Richard II married Anne of Bohemia in 1382. At the same time, Portugal's King Ferdinand allied with England against Castile. King Ferdinand himself had a claim to the Castilian throne, and had tried but failed to press it throughout the 1360s and 1370s. But now that the sickly, pious, and inexperienced John was on the Castilian throne, Ferdinand had a chance. He promised the hand of his daughter Beatrice to the Earl of Cambridge's son, and 2,000 English soldiers sailed to Portugal to invade Castile in God's name. When Charles V died in 1380, his brothers had to share power over his young successor. Duke Louis of Anjou had left for Italy to claim the Kingdom of Naples, while John of Berry let Philip of Burgundy handle affairs. Philip faced empty coffers. New taxes failed, as most regions refused to pay, sparking unrest. In 1382, tax riots broke out in Rouen, Normandy. Angry workers looted homes, freed prisoners, and burned records. The city guards eventually restored order, but soon after, chaos erupted as well. Poorer workers attacked tax collectors, the wealthy, and Jewish quarters in the capital. Philip and the young King Charles VI crushed the revolt, but anger lingered. In Flanders, Philip van Artevelde led Ghent against Count Louis. On May 3, 1382, he surprised Bruges during a festival. Ghent's disciplined militia routed Louis's drunken soldiers at Beverholtveld, and van Artevelde captured the city. By summer, the rebels controlled most of Flanders. The English Parliament debated whether or not to intervene in Flanders, and found they were more willing to help God in Iberia instead. Bishop Henry de Spencer took matters into his own hands and launched his own crusade under Pope Urban VI's authority, as Count Louis supported Clement VII. Duke Philip, worried about his wife's inheritance in Flanders, rushed to work with Louis. On November 27, 1382, the French crushed 30,000 Flemings at Rosbeck, killing van Artevelde and ending the revolt. Bruges and other towns surrendered, though Ghent still resisted. In 1383, De Spencer landed with 11,000 men, and seized towns like Dunkirk. But disease and French reinforcements forced De Spencer to retreat in shame. Elsewhere, the war between Portugal and Castile had gotten off to a slow start. King John became ill, delaying his invasion. English soldiers stationed in Lisbon caused trouble, fighting locals and demanding more pay. King Ferdinand's sickness had his wife Leonor rule on his behalf, and her closeness to his Castilian advisors angered many. When the couple's newborn son died in July 1382, Portugal made peace with Castile. Plans for Princess Beatrice to marry the Earl of Cambridge's son ended, and instead she was offered to John himself. In 1383, Ferdinand died. Beatrice was named Queen of Portugal, and Leonor became regent with Castile's support. Many Portuguese opposed this and feared losing their independence. John, the Grand Master of the Aviz military religious order and illegitimate half-brother of Ferdinand, rose as the leader and protector of Lisbon. By early 1384, King John marched into Portugal, seized power from Leonor, and prepared to besiege Lisbon with French support. Though the siege was delayed for months due to poor health and shortages of money and troops. Meanwhile, John of Aviz declared himself to be King of Portugal, and began winning victories at Trancoso in May and another at Mirtola in the Algarve. In July 1385, Castile invaded again with 30,000 men. The Portuguese had around 12,000, supported by English and Gascon archers. On August 14th at Aljubarrota, north of Lisbon, the Portuguese defended strong ground, complete with trenches and stakes. When the Castilians attacked, they were barraged by the English longbows before being funneled into kill zones, causing their army to collapse by sunset. Thousands fell, and King John fled. Portuguese independence was secured. In 1383, England and France started peace talks at Lewingham near Calais, and the truce was signed until October 1384. Soon after, Count Louis died, and his lands went to his daughter Margaret and son-in-law Duke Philip. Philip broke the truce and crushed Ghent's revolt by 1385. After getting into border clashes with the Scots in 1385 and sending Gaunt off to once again press his claim to the Sealing throne in 1386, one of Richard's trusted advisors, Michael de la Pole, asked Parliament for new taxes worth around £220,000 sterling, more than twice than the hated poll tax of 1381. Angry, Parliament demanded Pole's removal, and even stripped Richard of his power. A council ruled for him instead. Richard would have none of it. In December 1387, Richard tried and failed to sit an army against Parliament, which was now under the merciless control of the Lords Appellant. They executed or exiled many of Richard's allies and ruled harshly. But it did not take long for people to accuse the Lords Appellant themselves of greed and waste. By 1389, Richard regained control, built new alliances with younger nobles, and ruled with calmer advisors. At the same time, Charles VI came of age and reformed his own government to reduce corruption and strengthen France's finances. Both kings recognized that peace was needed, and in June, another 2 decades of war between England and France came to an end at Lewingham. A 3-year truce was agreed upon, with plans in place for a lasting, permanent peace. Scotland gave in to French demands to accept the peace, while Castile made peace with Portugal. By late 1389, the Hundred-Year War halted almost everywhere. The question was, would it dare resume a third time?